The series that tells the story of Jiu-jitsu Fadda continues. And this time we'll talk about the progress of Jiu-jitsu after Fadda left the Navy and went it alone without Master Luiz de França. We emphasize that all this work is non-profit and aims only to show everyone's gratitude to our beloved Master Fadda. Chapter 2, Bento Ribeiro's Academia Fadda. There is still speculation about the origins of Jiu-jitsu in the world. Recent historical finds in Egypt dating back to 3300 BC demonstrate that the art of fighting without weapons was already practiced well before the era of samurai and monks. However, it is correct to say that Jiu-jitsu was organized as a martial art and philosophy in Japan. Practiced in Brazil since 1908 by Navy officers and guests, the gentle art found the suburb of Bento Ribeiro through an ex-marine and his friends. Discover now the history of those who were the forerunners of inclusive and adapted jiu-jitsu. The first family to challenge the graces and their hegemony in jiu-jitsu. Discover the history of the Faddas. In 1938, SDFN SFL, NIP, 3847-4565, Fadda, learned in the Navy all the concepts taught by the personal defense instructor Corporal Fusilero Naval Franca. With a lot of commitment and discipline, he stood out and advised the instructor, which is why France was encouraged to teach the true origins of Navy personal defense. Franca said that Soldier Fadda would be a student of great promise for the development of Jiu-jitsu in Brazil, mainly due to his way of dealing with students, dedication in developing techniques and ease in the teaching-learning process. Like a knowledge machine, Fadda gathered all this knowledge, and was ready to scale it around the world. In 1942, Luiz de França decided to promote Fadda to the title of Black Belt Teacher, as an example of Japanese philosophical methodology. Fadda resigned from military service on August 8, 1944 as a Naval Marine soldier in the supplementary ranks, SFL. He established his objectives of spreading knowledge in the humblest region of the city and ended up being recognized as a precursor of suburban jiu-jitsu. Franca, knowing Fadda's prominence in the world outside the barracks, was very proud of his student, found that everything he had taught Fadda made him an example of a citizen and teacher for many. Around 1947, Oswaldo Fadda, after giving classes sporadically in clubs, schools and also in the army through the support of his brother Umberto, received the initiative from his student and friend Chandu, who offered his house to start the classes, Rua Papari N² 126, but actually opened his academy at Rua João Vicente at N² 1155 and later, 1191, Bento Ribeiro. Also other addresses that were the base of Fadda in the many storms that occurred. On January 27, 1950, the Academia Fadda de Bento Ribeiro was founded, where the academy introduced jiu-jitsu to this region, and it still exists today. His classes were open to all young people, children and adolescents who were interested, including people with physical disabilities or other health problems that distance this public from physical activities, much less fighting sports. Classes had a social aim, and payment was strict discipline to be obeyed, respect for parents and continuity in studies. The Fadda Academy became a great reference in the region, not because of the jiu-jitsu martial art, but because it served as a model and educational support, a socio-humanitarian so lacking at the time, because Fadda knew that jiu-jitsu would help the most humble people. As jiu-jitsu was still not well known as a martial art and sports practice, Oswaldo Fadda, together with his students and teachers, traveled, and did several demonstrations of fights and acrobatics. He did not choose places where he could put his mats, he would be there, and even often without tatami mats, on the hard floor itself. Oswaldo Fadda's troupe captivated new fans and surprised everyone, of all ages and cultures. Fadda performed everywhere, inland cities, slums, public squares, beaches, hills, circuses, churchyards and clubs, aiming at the wide expansion of her practice as possible for everyone. A true show of skills available to anyone who was willing. Leaps over deadly obstacles, public challenges, fights against much stronger and bigger opponents, education and Oriental culture presented through kimonos and greetings, respect, education and toughness in combat. A paradox that made Jiu-jitsu Fadda a benchmark for parents to educate their children. Fadda was so dedicated that he made his students kimonos with fabrics from wheat flour bags that were discarded from the bakery located below the Bento Ribeiro Academy. Always friendly and generous, he even taught the disabled, often criticized. Juventino de Paula, known as Aranya who had physical problems, and Lou Rival, called Torpedo for not having both legs, were great examples of the effectiveness of the fairy system in the development of fights, as well as in the process of social inclusion, since at that time no one set out to teach excluded and handicapped people. Representing Jiu-jitsu Fadda, Torpedo and Aranya, among others, followed Fadda everywhere. They challenged fighters to beat them. Many matches took place, mainly Torpedo who won many fights against able-bodied and non-disabled fighters. Fadda believed that Jiu-jitsu was a way to help heal everyone's physical and emotional health. This process of social inclusion of poor and disabled people was a paradox for the culture of the time, since Jiu-jitsu was an expensive sport and only practiced by the elite of society. Introducing this public Fadda was a pioneer in the adaptation and insertion of physically disabled people in the context of martial art. He also devoted all his enthusiasm to encouraging his students to become outstanding soldiers, such as paratroopers or Marines. In the history of Fadda Academy, it can be noted that most of its disciples followed this professional trajectory. To this day, the profile of students and conduct at the academy reflect this military memory. In 1965 Fadda took to television, through the show Captain Hurricane, the fights and challenges for everyone who didn't know Jiu-Jitsu. The program was on the recently inaugurated TV Globo and as part of the ferry attractions, it performed live challenges. Elio Fadda, around the age of 17, held many fights, especially with Marines from the Brazilian Navy who always showed up for the challenge. The Marines did not have a flag, but they were fully aware that their attributes as fighters were efficient and effective, thus justifying the roots of the military jiu-jitsu of the Navy preceded by Sada Miyako, Takeo Yano, Luiz de França and all the influence of Mitsuyo Maeda in the presentation and introduction of jiu-jitsu in Brazil. Bento Ribeiro's Fadda Academy became the temple of suburban jiu-jitsu, a place that accepted anyone who was willing to become a different person. As humble as the academy and its audience were, Fadda's jiu-jitsu was widespread. To this day, social projects are the greatest reference for Fadda practitioners. A way of repaying the master's gesture of solidarity, this is repeated continuously. All fairies have in their roots a history of overcoming and altruism, examples of life in real life. Currently hundreds of fairy lineage academies are spread across Brazil and the world with their indelible mark, education, discipline and martial respect. The Fadda de Bento Ribeiro Academy, located at Rua João Vicente 1191, is still open, with 9th degree red belt Elio Fadda as its main representative, as an example of the continuity of all the efforts of his predecessors.